Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So, no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm still your host, Michael Chikeen, and today I'm very excited to have with us in the studio here, this virtual studio, Jacqueline Gottuso. Jacqueline is the co-founder of Feed the Frontline, a dual mission nonprofit that supported local restaurants and their staff, donating meals to frontline workers and vulnerable populations. They raised over $1 million and delivered nearly 100,000 meals, which is amazing. Since then, Jacqueline joined ReThink Food, a nonprofit organization that bridges the gap between good food that goes to waste and the demand for meals many of our food insecure neighbors face. She leads the company's strategic planning in pursuit of creating lasting food system impact that better connects food service partners with community-based organizations in need. Jacqueline's super passionate about all things sustainability, hospitality, and food security. So let's dive in. Jacqueline, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
So I was reading through your bio and saw that you have been doing some management consulting prior to your current position. And I would just love to start with kind of like your journey. So why and how you decided to transfer from that into sustainability and, in some ways, climate action. I'd love to hear all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a bit of a winding road, as most are, but basically, right before I decided to accept a full-time job to work as a management consultant, I did an internship in college at a restaurant group, and I kind of fell in love with the magic of hospitality. I just was really amazed by kind of the diversity of people and perspectives working in the restaurant industry. And I decided to accept the job to work as a consultant. I figured I'd amass my business toolkit, and then I would go, be a restaurant operator. And I was, on that path, romanticizing about that, and then COVID hit, and suddenly becoming a restaurant operator did not seem like a great career pivot. But I
Wow.
still really, yeah, I still
Wow.
really, yeah. It was a pretty bad timing.
Yeah, but also like a complete change your trajectory. That's what I was wowing that like you
Yeah,
like that whole thing of like you have a plan and then you get hit in the face with reality. Like like you're so gung ho about this thing, and not only was like that timeline completely like, okay, I can't do anything because literally these restaurants are closed or
yep,
closing, etc. But
yep.
did you ever think of maybe going back into hospitality after this was all done, or was your mindset really like irrevocably altered and you kind of took this other path?
I would say a little bit of both. Yeah, so I had, accepted an offer to work at the Momofuku Group on, I think, March 1st of 2020. And about 2 weeks
Oh,
later, my would-be boss contacted me and said, hey, understandably, we can't hire anyone new right now. We're actually furloughing all of our employees. Um,
oh no.
and so I quickly realized, okay, this is not the right time, but I did still really love and care about restaurants. And I saw how fragile the food system was and how vulnerable these restaurants were. And that's really what inspired me to start Feed the Frontline and to continue working in the restaurant space, but just in a slightly different way. So Feed the Frontline's whole mission was first and foremost about helping restaurants in our communities stay in business, keep their doors open, keep people employed, keep neighborhoods safe. There's so much good that restaurants have to offer to the communities that they're in, and a big goal of ours was really just to support those restaurants that we loved. And at the same time, we saw that frontline healthcare workers were, terrified to go home. They were sleeping in their garages. They didn't want to infect their loved ones or their
Wow.
children or their pets. And they were literally working, 18 to 24-hour shifts every day. And we saw that kind of we knew the magic of hospitality, and we knew how, soul nourishing a good meal is. And we figured we could match what the restaurants had to offer, which was meals and love and good food, and match that with the frontline healthcare workers who are literally putting their lives on the line every single day to try to, figure out what was going on during the beginning of COVID.
Right. Wow. And so that is such a beautiful match for that time. Whereas, you're raising money that's not coming from the frontline workers. It's going to restaurants that are suffering the worst hit in their existence. It's so wonderful. And I think after that, were you convinced, like, this is the work that I was meant to be doing, and I'd like to go work for something that continues to help people, that gives back more? Because I've seen a lot of people transition in that way after the COVID. Like, I think all of us were confronted with this existential threat and thinking, well, what can I offer that has more impact, that, like, instead of, let's say, consulting, for example, that, you hear horror stories of, are they worthwhile consultants, all
Yeah,
these things.
totally.
And so what was your search like, going from feed the front line when, restaurants open back up, they don't need you on the ground anymore,
Yeah.
to the search of, like, what do I do next? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, and one thing I'll say is that restaurants kind of always need us on the ground. Our goal was never to, be their only source of income, but margins are so razor thin in the restaurant industry that any type of alternative revenue stream that they can get, especially during downtime, you have to hire people to come in at 4 p.m., but your guests don't come in until 5:30. And so what are people doing between then after they're done prepping? So there is actually a great opportunity for restaurants to have these alternative revenue streams, for feeding their neighbors or stuff like that. But for me personally, I think a big piece of it was about having more impact on the world, like especially during a time where things were really scary. And I wasn't a doctor, so I knew I couldn't like help develop a vaccine, but I did know that I could help coordinate the logistics between restaurants and people who need food.
Right.
And then the other part was just learning more about the food system and just understanding, really how challenged and broken it is across so many different realms. Like first it was restaurants, but then it was food insecurity and food access and the ability to get healthy food or good food and to be able to afford it. And then it was sustainability and like, how is the food that we're growing being grown, and how is it being transported, and how much of it is being wasted. And I think just my whole world kind of exploded when I started to dig more into the food system.
Right. Yeah, it's quite the mess. I know that, like, there's even an app here. I don't know if it's in the US. It's called Too Good to Go.
Mhm.
Have you heard that?
Yep.
So,
Rethink's partners with Too Good to Go.
yeah, we'll get into that later, because maybe it's kind of part and parcel for what you're doing. And speaking of the food system, like, are you able to walk me through, I don't think we have 5 hours of lecture time, but like what the current food system is, like how it's set up, and maybe you can explain like what it is and what it isn't, and then kind of what your dream is for it to become.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely by no means an expert, but I have been reading a lot about it. I think one thing to preface with is it really does vary, country to country, region to region, even city to
Mm-hmm.
city. But I've mostly focused, my research and my readings, on what's going on in the U.S. And one of the biggest themes that you come across when you start to dig in is that, the food system is broken, but that is by design. Like there are people who are benefiting from it. And there's a massive industry that's, predicated around growing, a surplus of corn so that you can turn it into animal feed or hyper processed products or high fructose corn syrup. I mean, the lobbies are so strong, in DC, and the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act, which was recently passed, which had a ton of climate provisions, didn't say anything about eating less meat. It just goes to show that there are a lot
Yeah.
of people who are benefiting from the broken food system. Um, Today, I would say in the U.S., the food system is just really dominated by kind of capitalism and a lot of capitalist interests. And listen, I worked at Bain. I'm a capitalist as well, but it has taken away a lot of the dignity, the culture, the vitality that should be associated with food, and that should be associated with kind of this basic human right of healthy, real, good food,
Right.
in pursuit of profit is kind of the simplest way to say it.
Right. Well, it's kind of like I think people like me that live outside of the U.S. So I, raised in Canada. Like my family's background is Italian, and so we've been going to this country
Yeah,
for years. And so the idea of socialized medicine and all this stuff, like to not have it is very foreign to me. And
yeah,
the conversations I've had with Americans that see how broken it is, and I think the food system is probably similar, where they say, well, there's a complete conflict of interest if you're trying to get profit out of something that should be benefiting the health and well-being and even the overall wellness of a country. Because if you're pushing people to, on the basic level, consume more and eat more, like that's also not healthy, because people should be eating the amount that they feel satiates them and eating whole foods and things like that. Instead, you have corn syrup and fast food and all these things. But it's interesting how you say, like, well, I'm a capitalist, and because I would consider myself as well. Like I've had e-commerce companies and all these things, and it's like, especially in America, it seems like people are afraid really afraid to say that we think capitalism is totally broken. And so it's nice to hear people that, we're management consultants, we're maybe in finance because that's where they thought they could earn the most. Now, you know, pivoting and saying, like, I want to fix this system that is completely shattered. So regarding food systems, where do you, or like, I was going to say, where do you think is the biggest problem? But it seems like a corporate interest. So where do you think we are hopefully going that that would be better for all of us?
yeah. I mean, I think where I feel really galvanized and passionate about is, what those corporate interests have led to is, a huge degradation of the land, and really just some terrible environmental impacts, due to the way that, livestock are grazed, due to monocropping, and monoculture, due to the fact that there's no cover cropping anymore. The soil has been degraded. There's not carbon being sequestered into the soil. And so there's really a huge environmental challenge. And I think I read that the food industry accounts for like 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. Um, so it's really a pretty massive
Yeah.
contributor to the environmental, impacts that we're all facing as a world. I guess I say that to say that where we're going, I think will continue to be, capitalist market-based solutions, but there'll be solutions that help address some of those environmental challenges, because that's really been the externality that we can no longer ignore, that we have been ignoring for a century or more, and really can no longer can. Um,
Right.
and I'm hopeful that, through the Inflation Reduction Act, through like a lot of, new companies that are working on cell-based meat and plant-based meat and vertical farming, these things all have their pros and cons, but I think there will be solutions that help tackle kind of some of those environmental externalities that help us get to, more sustainable food systems.
Right. Yeah, I do think that, and maybe because I've just been entering in more of these like MCJ, like my climate journey sort of groupings, where it seems like the next 10 years there's going to be such a gigantic shift for how people eat, and all of those people that are doubling down on meat and an organ meat and all these things we see online that are completely absurd on their face. I think a lot of these people are going to be shocked with uh, how many more options for plant-based eating comes out there, or cultivated meat, meat created through fermentation and all these other different modalities. Uh, I think once there's more options on shelves, people will choose the one that is pretty clearly better for them health wise. And Are you seeing any of that with the people that you're meeting, like people maybe in your family or friends that were maybe meat eaters that are shifting a little bit, or is that not happening in your community yet?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I'm based in New York City, so there are,
Right.
lots of like, left leaning, more progressive people who are, choosing to vote with their forks and are, climivores or whatever they call it, people who, make decisions based on the environmental impact of the foods that they're eating. I think, one thing I do want to say is I do believe that there's a role for animals and livestock in the food system. And I don't like at face value have, assuming that it's done humanely, like I don't have a huge issue with
Hmm.
eating meat, but I personally have had to swear off red meat because the environmental impact is just so great. Um, I think it's less about eliminating meat from the food system, um, and only having these kind of cultured or plant-based or cell-based alternatives, but more about educating the public to really pick and choose when they're eating meat. It should be, more of a delicacy like it used to be than kind of like a 3 meal a day type thing. And
Interesting.
I think, the way that based on the subsidies that are given, the way that meat is priced can definitely help influence that. If the cost skyrockets, um, not just because of inflation, but like specifically just for meat, if the cost goes up, I think that will lead to kind of less consumption. And consumers should be aware about like what type of meat they're getting, and whether those
Hmm.
that meat came from CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, or whether they were kind of free range grazing around. Um, Sometimes the way that animals are grazed can actually be good for the environment.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. I never heard about that. How does that work? Like how their grazing is good for the environment.
I think it's because of the way that like the ruminants graze across the land when they eat, and then when they poop, the poop can then fertilize the soil, and it can actually be, I think, more environmentally beneficial than destructive.
Hmm.
But obviously, if animals aren't grazing, or if their manure isn't going back into the soil, then you take away all of the kind of those life cycle effects that can be positive.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I'd never heard that before. I've only recently heard of CAFO, and well, we all know how terrible all of those sort of systems are. And I guess because there's even books coming out, like one not coming out, one I read last year, The Overstory, which really hit me over the head with the difference of plants and trees and how is a life within them, and the
Oh
life that they
yeah.
kind of give to the planet and to us. And like I think it all comes together. Like once you open that door to realize what we're doing to the planet, then the next step kind of seems to be like, well, if we should respect the planet and trees and plants more, well then animals are our sisters and brothers on this planet, and we think of it differently because there is still a food chain, and obviously you have the really ethical hardcore vegans that will not eat meat whatsoever, and fair enough, you guys do you. But like you said, I think there is an ecosystem that we can respect where you can do things humanely, and it can be good for the environment, and we can have like the circle of life without having like hormone injections and
Yeah.
all this cruelty that's so brutal. And that's one of the reasons I stopped eating meat. Like maybe every now and then, if I'm at a place and it's, you know, I know it's going to be a nice cut and things like that and prepared properly, then I'll go ahead. But otherwise, that's the big one. Like I don't want to pump my body full of all these drugs, like indirectly from these animals. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I was
Yeah.
thinking. So go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, and as a consumer, like it's really challenging to know. Even
Mm-hmm.
certified organic, which is a great step in the right direction. Like they can still use, I think they're called glyphosates or glycophosphates. They can still use like a lot of sort of sketchy,
Unbelievable.
additives and farming practices, and you can actually still have, chickens that are shoved in a coop that never see the light of day. You know, despite like products being marketed as natural.
Right.
So as the consumer, we do kind of have the wool pulled over our eyes, and it's up to us to do a lot of investigating and digging right now, which probably isn't fair for your average consumer who's a busy
No,
person and
I think
just wants
it's
to.
totally fair. I don't think a lot of Americans, and I don't know how much time you've spent outside of the U.S., but like if I even see in Canada something's from the U.S., I will choose a different product
Yeah,
because
I believe
I
that.
know there's so many like hidden flavorings, hidden secret chemicals in there that we have no idea what it's doing to us. Like even in Europe, I have a family member visiting me now, and when they're eating something, you can say like, what is in this? These are just regular tomatoes and eggs. Why does it taste so much better than home? And
Yeah,
Canada does have stricter rules on food, but in Europe, it's really paid attention to for how they're treating animals and how they're treating the produce and all of these things that I think a lot more Americans are starting to take notice of what that their food system is bought and paid for um, by people who just want profit. They really don't care if it serves the people. They just want to be able to sell more, create more, and it doesn't matter what sort of cruelty is injected into that system, as long as the only thing that's coming out the other side is more dollars.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was a bit
and it's
soapboxy, but like, did you agree? Is there anything that like you'd like to correct there? Because again, these are things that I feel and read, so feel free feel free
yeah,
to
no, me too,
correct
me
me.
too. I'm feeling and reading these too. No, I think that's 100% spot on, and that's why I clarified at the beginning that a lot of the reading and stuff that I've done is specific to the American food system, because in
Hmm.
Europe and in Canada, y'all are like much more ahead of the curve. Um, so yeah, I think that's 100% spot on, and I do think there's really just like really quite like deceptive marketing going on, right? Because like you were saying, these companies, a lot of companies, they don't care about the welfare of their animals, and yet they're putting on their milk cartons like these pastoral scenes with cows like grazing outside and on a sunny day,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's hard to decouple that as the consumer to say like, okay, I'm seeing this cow grazing in a pasture, but actually that cow is like trapped in a cement, CAFO, like knee deep in poop, which is yeah, it's just
Yeah.
it's challenging.
Yeah, and they have all those gag orders, I believe, or ag gag or something like that, where they're like by law, no media entity or any film crew can go in and film the premises.
Yeah,
Like it's actually illegal, which is an
yeah,
insane law on its face. But like I was just watching a couple of these videos over the last year, and it is really hard to want to eat meat after seeing things like that because like even the stress hormones that are going into that animal once it's being slaughtered for for food production, like that is going to eventually I do think that like those hormones and things like that will also get into us, which I think are probably not great for us.
yeah,
But
and
go
I
ahead.
think that that's also why I say like it's not that there's no place for animals in the food system. I actually lived abroad in Sevilla in Spain
Cool.
while I was in college, and like the jamon there is just revered, and those pigs like they're living great lives, like they are they're eating like 100% beyota acorn diets, like they're living good lives, and they are contributing to the land, and to like these cycles of life. They're probably eating pests or some type of prey, like they are contributing, but yeah, it's just when it's taken out of that context is when the problems start to arise.
Yeah. Yeah. Bayonne ham just makes my mouth water. Like again, I don't get to
Yeah,
eat that often, but if I have someone visiting that is really into meat, then we'll go to a local market and we'll get it like cut fresh and we'll have a little bit. And I kind of look at eating sometimes like if everyone ate like I ate, would that make a world a better place? And I look at McDonald's, for example. If everyone ate McDonald's like I ate McDonald's, there wouldn't be any McDonald's. Like
right,
I love their soft serve cones. I'll go in for like an egg muffin here and there, but
right.
McDonald's is not being kept alive by consumers like me, for example. But and to get into the more of the food system, I would like to hear all about Rethink Food. Like, what is it? How does it work? And obviously your place within it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rethink Food is a nonprofit with the mission of creating a more sustainable and equitable food system. it was founded by, our founder's name is Matt Joswiak, and he actually worked in fine dining restaurants for the first 10 or 12 years of his career. And he saw how much food was being going to waste firsthand by working in these restaurants where, you know, you had to cut off one specific tiny part of it and then throw the rest away. And he just thought that was ludicrous. And so he started ReThink. Originally, it was just a sustainable angle, and the goal was to recover excess food from any sources across New York. So those were restaurants, those were catering companies, those were event venues, grocery stores, and then have a team of trained culinary chefs cook all of that food and turn it into nutritious meals for food insecure communities. And they were doing that all between 2017 and 2020, kind of scaling up, you know, relatively slowly. In 2019, they had $1 million in, you know, $1 million budget. And then in 2020, of course, there was a huge spotlight put on food and food insecurity. And ReThink pivoted really quickly to also, similar to Feed the Front Line, like try to support restaurants, because the restaurants were no longer donating excess food. They were, I mean, after they ran out of their initial amount, because they weren't open and they had no food to donate. And so rather than asking these restaurants to donate food, we pivoted and we started paying restaurants to prepare meals for food insecure communities. And similar to what I learned with Feed the Front Line, like we just learned how amazing it is when community feeds community, right? Like there are so many benefits. First of all, you have the restaurant down the street, catering a population, you know, culturally relevant. They're closer to one another, so you can sometimes walk the meals from one location to another, which helps with, you know, sustainability on that side. And yeah, basically now we kind of operate both pillars sort of separately. So we have our restaurant program where we work with these restaurants in the communities we serve. 80% of them are women or minority owned. And so we pay restaurants. We've invested over $32 million since COVID to prepare meals for their communities. And then we still have the sustainability arm where we recover the excess food and we turn it into meals. And combined through those two streams, we put out about 45,000 meals every single week.
Wow, that's enormous. And
yeah.
where are these? You see, you have 32 million to repurpose into the entire food system you're creating. Where is that money coming from?
Right now, it's mostly coming from private donations, but we're actually, it is a lot. Yeah, we had a huge influx during COVID, again, with that kind of spotlight being put on food insecurity. But we are working with some amazing partners, corporate businesses that are helping us generate these sustainable revenue streams. So we've had sustainability partnerships with big corporations that are actually paying us to pick up their excess food. They're recognizing the cost associated with picking it up and turning it into high quality meals, which is really amazing. And then we're also working with more high profile restaurants that are adding a line item to every check to fundraise for ReThink as part of their operations. So we have a partner down in Miami who donates 2% of the total of every bill. It gets, you know, added as a surcharge and then is donated back to ReThink Food, and they donate about $40,000 every month, which is really awesome.
Every month, jeez.
Yeah, through a few different locations that they have.
Right, and are you thinking after New York to you know, see if you can create that ecosystem in places like, you know, Los Angeles or even Austin or, you know, Chicago, places with all these big restaurants where there's so much food waste that they can go somewhere like it. And if you guys, and now to go back to how I mentioned, you're familiar with Too Good To Go?
Yeah.
And do you guys work with them at all, or is there any like cross allegiance to be made? Because it doesn't seem from what you said that there's any conflict of interest, is there?
Yeah, exactly. We're actually their New York charity partner. So if you go on the Too Good To Go app, there's an option to make a donation, and if you click on that, it directs you to ReThink Food. So we work really closely together, but they are doing such amazing work. We play in sort of different fields. So the field that they play in is, you know, smaller restaurants with smaller amounts of excess, and they're getting that right to the consumer
Mm.
by having the restaurants package it and putting it on their app. With ReThink, we work with bigger operations. So we work with Whole Foods locations and Trader Joe's locations and big catering companies that have big commissary kitchens. Because we actually have a refrigerated truck and a commissary kitchen with a walk-in, and we can take on those big volumes of food. We recover about 10,000 pounds of food every week, and then we can turn all of that surplus of food into, like I said, thousands of meals every week.
Wow. Yeah, and how hard is it to set up an operation like that? Because, for example, for cities like I'd say big tourist populations in Europe, I would say like London, Barcelona, Paris, just to name some of the bigger ones.
Yep.
Like, how hard would it be to even for you to look for partners that could do, rethink food, but like it's just you're like, maybe it's not even connected, but just like how do I say it? Like propagating the idea of helping this food system be more conscious and intentional with how they deal with food waste.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what we're all about. We are active in 6 cities, but the majority of our operations are in New York. But our goal is really to develop the models, the playbooks, the education, and the guidance, so that any city in the world can take up this cause and can figure out ways that make sense for them to repurpose their excess food. Whether that's picking up food and bringing it to a commissary kitchen, or whether that's, we've explored the idea of just hiring folks to go work in like corporate cafeterias, go work one day a week or a few days a week, take all that excess food and make it into meals right there. Like there already are kitchens there. Do we need a third space?
Right. And sorry, what is a commissary kitchen?
So a commissary kitchen is just like a big high volume kitchen. So ReThink operates one commissary kitchen in downtown Manhattan, and that's where we have a team of 12 trained chefs who they sort through all of the food, they process it, they, some of it they'll freeze for later, some of it they'll use immediately, and they'll turn it all into meals. And then we actually have a team that comes in the afternoon and takes any food that wasn't able to get turned into meals. Say there's excess tomatoes or cherries or basil or something that didn't get into the meals, and they'll make products out of it that we also donate. So they'll make,
Okay.
chutneys, pestos, gumbos, chilies, like anything that can be packaged up and sent along with the fresh meals that we're preparing.
Wow. And you said now you're looking for revenue sources. Like, are approaching the point where there would be like a financial incentive for an entrepreneur to say, start it, I rethink food, not franchise, but rethink food blueprint in their local city, or will it always depend on restaurants that are making these donations?
Yeah, I think the goal is for the systems in each city to be funded by the partners in that city. So, if we're working with big corporations to pick up food from their corporate cafeterias, then they're paying us, and the restaurants are helping fundraise, and the community restaurants are making meals, and we're taking the excess. Like the goal is kind of to have it be a self-funded model. But I think in any city that could exist, like that can exist independent of ReThink. And if a funder just wanted to kind of kickstart that, they certainly could.
Right. That sounds great because like there is, if you ever have you been to Barcelona before when you were in Sevilla?
Yeah.
Right. So you know that there is an overwhelming amount of restaurants here. Like
Yeah.
there's a ton in New York, obviously, but for the size of Barcelona is the amount of like pastry shops and gelato shops and pizzerias and general restaurants. I still can never believe it when I'm in the middle of the city. So I think this would be an ideal place to set up something like Rethink Food, where you have
Yeah.
like even you already have the starting off point from Too Good to Go that's already pretty big here, and
Yep.
to get that going, and then like where do you think would be like the top two revenue sources that someone coming in that wants to improve a food system in a city could start standing up and maybe start making money in 6 months, like these are my first episodes, but hopefully, maybe an entrepreneur in some city that where Rethink Food isn't there, maybe they'd be like, okay, I would love to run this as a business, or just as enough that they can at least pay themselves to make a living while they build the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about finding corporations that are mission aligned and that can, a lot of big corporations right now have, whether it's through their marketing department or whether it's through their social impact department, like they have budget to pursue sustainable initiatives. And a lot of them produce a lot of excess food. I remember back when I was working as a consultant, we would get free lunch on Fridays and there would be just piles and piles and piles of leftover food. And in fact, we didn't even have Tupperware. So I would take like paper plates and like pile on the food to bring it home to eat that weekend. But anyway, these big corporations have a lot of food and they have the budget to pay. It doesn't have to be a crazy amount. It's really just covering costs. But I think that's the revenue source that I would go after first.
And what are these corporations? Because like in this, well, maybe in places like a food chain, for example, where you might have more waste and more ability for people to take away food. But what organizations, like if you can name one, or how it works, would have enough food waste that not only would they pay you to take it away, but the food itself would be of a high enough quality that you could make meals to resell?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. Pretty much any corporation that has a corporate cafeteria, especially right now during this hybrid working time, oftentimes the folks running the kitchens, they don't know how many people are coming in that day. And so if it's an office that, can hold 5,000 employees, they're probably preparing to feed 4,000 to 5,000 people, and then maybe 800 people come in that day.
That is disgusting.
Yeah, it's
oh my
pretty
gosh.
wild. And so like, especially right now, we're seeing there's so much, there's not that much predictability. And also, with those corporate cafeterias, it's just like we're so used to, getting what we want and having like an abundance of options. And so, companies don't want their employees to walk in, craving the chicken club and for the chicken club not to be there because, they ran out that day. And so there's always planned excess with any type of like high volume, anything that's not ordered a la carte. So it's more like buffet or cafeteria style, or events or, weddings. Like if someone put down that they want the fish, but then they see the steak and the steak looks really good, like there's always going to be extra steak. And so what happens with that extra steak, it often gets thrown away.
Right. And so you're able to take, because now I'm thinking of it more logistically, like let's say you're at an IKEA cafeteria or a Google campus for whatever. They had, like you said, a corporate cafeteria, and they have this food there, but since it's waste, like how quickly do you have to take that food, prepare it in one of those commissary kitchens, and then get it out to people? Because one, I think is, if you're giving it away to the homeless people, then that's one thing, but that's not going to create any more revenue. But if you're creating, did you say sometimes you're creating food that can then be sold, or no?
We don't do that right now. We don't play in that space. All of the food and meals that we prepare go to food insecure communities through our community organization partners. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of elements of food safety. I think one thing to stress as important is, you said we have waste and how quickly can we turn that around? It's actually not waste. It's totally viable food. Like it's not banana peels. It's
bananas.
It's like, yeah, it's bananas. It's like chopped and prepped, like beautiful, beautifully sliced potatoes or carrots or chicken. It's actually really good food that just didn't make it into someone's mouth. And cartons and cartons of eggs or bags of extra bread. And yeah, we typically turn it around within 24 to 48 hours or freeze it. But, all of our whole team is trained in food safety handling. And they'll know what can be held for, 24 hours, what can be held for slightly longer, what needs to be frozen. And unfortunately, because we are at the end of the supply chain, like some of the food isn't viable anymore, and we will compost that. But the vast majority is extremely viable. And like, if I'm
Wow.
in the commissary kitchen on days that we're receiving food from Trader Joe's, I'm like, oh man, like there's this, figs I wanted to buy the other day. Like they look delicious.
Yeah, it's fig season right now, and they are
Yeah,
delicious.
they are
Can confirm.
delicious.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. And so even places like Trader Joe's, which is essentially a grocery store, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they have produce there, and like they're just going to give you things that are going to waste. Because maybe, I don't know if you could give me any figure, because again, I want to give hope and ideas to people that want to take climate action and do these things as a
Yeah.
business, but perhaps don't have donors, or don't have time unless they actually can have their own revenue or anything. So like, let's say a both, or choose whichever you want, something like a Trader Joe's that's maybe one store, for example, or a corporate cafeteria. Are you able to shed any light on how much each of those entities would be willing to pay per month to have their waste taken away?
Yeah, it really does depend on the volume that we're picking up and the client, but we are charging in the ballpark of $800 to $1,800 per month
Okay.
to pick up that food. The cool thing is, one, if you're partnering with a nonprofit like ReThink Food, there are tax incentives associated with doing it. So I was actually recently on a call with the woman who started Starbucks whole food donation program, and she was saying, like, at first they were doing it because it was the right thing to do, and then they realized they were doing it because it's actually good business. And so that's a big part that offsets that cost. And then the other piece is that you're actually paying less for your waste, right? Like you pay per pound or per ton for the food that gets thrown into a landfill, and so there are some savings recouped there. And we feel that the cost that they're paying, or the price that they're paying for us, is oftentimes offset, or at least partially offset, by those two kind of savings.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and I guess it would just matter on how many of these corporations and grocery stores you can get together, and then what your costs would be associated with taking away all of that waste. I really hope you guys are able to make like you said, a sustainable business out of it. But even if not, like hopefully you don't need so many donations to stay in business and
Yeah.
keep doing it. Like the less donations you need, the longer you can stay in business, which I think is what all of us want. So I think it's super amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I guess sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was saying like well, I was going to pivot to the last question I have. So if you had something to say about that, please go ahead. No? Okay.
No, all good.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge in redesigning our food system? Like I think at the end of this conversation, we probably end up at overpopulation, like we do with everything with the climate thing, and it seems kind of insurmountable, as people love their kids. Go figure.
Yeah.
And but what do you think is our biggest challenge to redesign?
Well, I think the cool thing about, I mean, the cool and bad thing about the food system is, it's actually not a question of supply. There's 2.5 billion tons of food wasted every year. That's 1/3 of all food produced. And
Wow.
actually, if you just recouped half of that, we could technically feed the world's population. So we have plenty of food. It's really a logistics challenge. And that's what we see on a micro scale with ReThink Food. And like you said, like picking up the gelatos and the tapas and, whatever food you have, and getting it to community organization in the right
Right.
amount of time, and matching supply with demand. Like it's one thing to get tacos to, and like to Chinatown, to a population where most people, are Chinese or of Asian descent. But that food actually might end up going into the trash because it's culturally unfamiliar. It's another thing to get
Mm.
tacos to a community where, most people are Hispanic and they're really excited about tacos, and they're actually going to eat that because it's part of their culture. So yeah, we see logistically on a micro level, and then also on a macro level, like there's just so many steps of the food transportation process, and distribution process. And at every single step, food gets wasted and thrown away. And yeah, it's just kind of creating like more intentional and efficient supply chains that can mitigate all of the food that goes to waste. And yeah, we have enough food.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm just so excited that people like you have decided to not be management consultants anymore
Yeah.
and to dive into this to this problem because there is a lot of intellectual rigor in the fight against climate change and creating these food systems so that all of us can live in an environment where we're not wasting everything. And I think that's what capitalism has kind of created because if the idea is for us to be living in a world of convenience, that means there always has to be something stocked and no one can ever go without what they need exactly when they need it, which is it's kind of ridiculous. It is totally ridiculous. And so if we're not yet ready to change how messed up our food system is as it pertains to capitalism, then the best we can do now is exactly what you're doing, and it's why I was so excited to have you on and hear all about this. So thank you so much for joining me today and hopefully making me a little bit more informed for how this works. And I'll use more too good to go apps while I'm in the city now to be more intentional.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you didn't enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.